The twin moons of Zephyr 7 cast an eerie silver glow across the crystalline desert as Marcus Kane sealed the last breach in his mining station's outer hull. The solar storm had been fiercer than predicted, sending electromagnetic pulses that fried half his communication equipment and cracked the reinforced viewing ports. At 34, Marcus had seen his share of cosmic weather during his 8 years on this remote planet, but this storm had been particularly vicious. He wiped sweat from his brow with a grease-stained cloth, his dark hair damp against his forehead. The mining station wasn't much to look at, a collection of prefabricated modules connected by sealed walkways, surrounded by extraction equipment and solar collectors. But it was home. More importantly, it was his sanctuary from the chaos of civilized space. After his discharge from the engineering corps, following a transport accident that claimed his entire unit, Marcus had used his settlement pay to purchase this remote mining claim. The solitude suited him. No more orders, no more losing friends to bureaucratic incompetence, no more watching good people die for corporate profits. Just him, his machines, and the endless expanse of Zephyr 7's untamed wilderness. The planet was technically habitable, with a breathable atmosphere and temperatures that ranged from merely uncomfortable to moderately hostile. More importantly, it was rich in rare earth minerals and largely ignored by the major shipping lanes. Perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. Marcus was checking the power grid readouts when he heard a soft whimpering sound that cut through. The station's mechanical hum. He paused, listening. There it was again, coming from somewhere outside. His hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol at his hip. In 8 years, nothing had ever approached his station. The indigenous wildlife gave the noisy human settlement a wide berth. Moving to the observation deck, Marcus activated the external floods. The harsh white light illuminated the immediate area around the station, revealing the usual landscape of crystalline formations and metallic sand. But there, huddled against the base of his primary communications array, was something that made him blink twice. It was small, perhaps the size of a human child, with what appeared to be fur that shimmered with an inner light. As Marcus watched, the creature moved slightly, and he caught a glimpse of large, luminous eyes that reflected the floodlights like prisms. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, grabbing his emergency kit and a portable scanner. Against every survival, instinct screaming in his head, he found himself cycling through the airlock. The night air hit him with its familiar bite. Zephyr 7's atmosphere was thin enough to make exertion difficult and cold enough to remind you that this wasn't Earth. Marcus approached the huddled form cautiously, his scanner in one hand, medical supplies in the other. Up close, the creature was even more extraordinary. Its fur wasn't exactly fur at all, but something closer to crystalline fibers that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. The body was roughly humanoid, but clearly alien elongated limbs, joints that bent in slightly wrong directions, and those incredible eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what Marcus expected. The creature a juvenile, Marcus realized from its size and the way it moved, was clearly injured. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and there were scoring marks along its side that looked like burns from the recent solar storm. "Easy. There, little one," Marcus said softly, though he had no idea if the creature could understand human speech. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien child looked up at him, and Marcus felt something brush against his mind. Not quite thought, but something like emotion. Fear, pain, but also hope. The sensation was so unexpected that he nearly dropped his scanner. "Telepathic," he whispered, remembering fragmentary reports from his military days about species with psionic abilities. "Well, that's new." The creature made a soft trilling sound and extended one delicate hand toward Marcus. The gesture was so trusting, so vulnerable, that Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen for the first time in years. "All right, kid." Let's get you inside and see what we can do about those injuries. Carefully, Marcus lifted the alien child. It was lighter than expected, its crystalline fur warm to the touch and vibrating with a subtle harmonic frequency that was oddly soothing. The creature nestled against his chest, and again Marcus felt that gentle brush of emotion gratitude mixed with exhaustion. Back inside the station, Marcus converted his small medical bay into a makeshift veterinary clinic. His combat medic training had covered xenobiology basics, enough to recognize that the creature's injuries, while painful, weren't life-threatening. The leg was sprained rather than broken, and the burns were superficial. As he worked, cleaning wounds and applying synthetic skin grafts, Marcus found himself talking to his patient. "So what's your story, little one? Lost in the storm? Your family must be worried sick." The alien child Marcus had started thinking of it as Pip, for some reason, watched his every move with those incredible eyes. Occasionally, Marcus would feel another gentle touch against his mind, emotions rather than words, but somehow meaningful. Loneliness, fear, a deep, aching sense of being lost. "Yeah, I know that feeling," Marcus murmured, adjusting the small splint he'd fashioned for Pip's leg. "Being alone in a big, scary universe. But you're not alone right now, okay? We'll figure this out." By the time Marcus finished treating Pip's injuries, the alien child had fallen asleep on the medical table, curled into a ball with its tail wrapped around itself like a living blanket. The crystalline fur pulsed gently with each breath, creating patterns of light that were hypnotically beautiful. Marcus found himself standing there longer than necessary, simply watching. When was the last time he'd been responsible for another living being? When had he last felt needed, truly needed, by someone who wasn't trying to use him for military purposes? He set up a makeshift bed in his quarters and gently moved the sleeping Pip, covering the small form with his softest blanket. As he tucked the alien child in, he felt one more emotional touch-sleepy contentment and something that felt remarkably like affection. "Sleep well, little star," Marcus whispered, surprised by the tenderness in his own voice. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Pip sitting at his small table, carefully examining a piece of fruit with obvious hunger. The alien child's injuries had healed remarkably fast. The splint was no longer necessary, and the burns had faded to faint marks on the crystalline fur. "Good morning," Marcus said, moving slowly to avoid startling his guest. "Hungry?" Pip made a musical trilling sound and touched Marcus's mind with what could only be described as eager anticipation. Marcus prepared a simple meal, unsure what alien digestive systems could handle, but hoping that basic fruits and synthesized proteins would be safe. As Pip ate with delicate, precise movements, Marcus felt increasingly sad about the approaching goodbye. The alien child was clearly from a species with advanced intelligence and sophisticated social structures. Somewhere out there, a family was probably searching desperately for their lost young one. After breakfast, Pip stood and moved to the observation window, gazing out at the crystalline desert with obvious longing. The meaning was clear. It was time to go home. "You know where your family is?" Marcus asked. Pip turned and approached Marcus, placing one small hand on his arm. For a moment, Marcus felt a rush of images and emotions, vast crystal cities that grew like living things, beings of impossible beauty who moved through spaces that defied physics, and most importantly, a female figure whose love and worry came across like a physical force. "Your mother," Marcus said, understanding. "She's looking for you." Pip nodded, then did something unexpected. The small alien wrapped its arms around Marcus's waist in what was unmistakably a hug, projecting waves of gratitude and affection that brought tears to the hardened engineer's eyes. "Thank you too, little star," Marcus whispered, returning the embrace. "Take care of yourself out there." As Marcus watched Pip disappear into the shimmering heat waves of the desert morning, moving with the fluid grace of a creature perfectly adapted to this alien landscape. He felt a strange mixture of loss and hope. For the first time in years, he'd connected with another being. He'd been needed, trusted, appreciated. The sensation lingered long after Pip vanished from sight, a warm glow in Marcus's chest that made the silent station feel less like a prison and more like a home. He didn't know it yet, but his carefully constructed solitude was about to be shattered in the most wonderful way possible. 3 days had passed since Pip disappeared into the crystalline desert, and Marcus found himself checking the external sensors more frequently than necessary. He told himself it was routine maintenance, but the truth was harder to admit. He missed the small alien's presence. The station felt emptier somehow, the silence more oppressive. He was calibrating the mineral extraction array when the proximity alarm chimed softly. Marcus's heart skipped as he rushed to the observation deck, half expecting to see Pip's familiar crystalline fur shimmering in the afternoon light. Instead, his breath caught in his throat at what he actually saw. A figure approached across the desert with fluid, graceful movements that seemed to defy the harsh terrain. Even at a distance, Marcus could see this was no lost child. This was a fully grown adult of Pip's species, and the sight of her made something deep in his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. She was tall, nearly matching his own 6-foot frame, with the same crystalline fur that characterized her species, but where Pip's had been a soft silver white, hers was a deep, lustrous blue-black that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light. Her form was unmistakably feminine, with curves that the flowing, iridescent garments she wore only served to accentuate rather than conceal. But it was her face that truly captivated Marcus as she drew closer. High cheekbones gave her features an aristocratic elegance, while her large eyes the same prismatic quality as Pip's, but somehow infinitely more complex, held an intelligence and depth that made Marcus feel as though she could see straight through to his soul. She moved with the confidence of someone completely comfortable in her environment, crossing terrain that would challenge even Marcus's all-terrain vehicle as easily as walking through a garden. When she was close enough for the external pickups to register her presence clearly, she stopped and looked directly at the observation window where Marcus stood transfixed. Their eyes met across the distance, and Marcus felt that same gentle touch against his mind that he'd experienced with Pip, but where the child's mental contact had been simple emotions, this was something far more sophisticated. He sensed curiosity, gratitude, and underneath it all, an awareness that made his pulse quicken. Forcing himself to move, Marcus cycled through the airlock and stepped outside to meet her. Up close, she was even more breathtaking. Her crystalline fur caught the light of Zephyr 7's twin suns and scattered it in patterns that seemed to shift with her breathing. When she smiled, and Marcus was surprised to realize the expression. Translated perfectly across species lines, it was like watching a sunrise. "You are Marcus Kane," she said, her voice a melodic contralto that seemed to harmonize with itself. The words were clearly spoken in his language, though with an accent that turned the familiar syllables into something exotic and beautiful. "Yes," Marcus managed, suddenly very aware that he was wearing his work clothes and probably smelled like machine oil and recycled air. "And you're Pip's mother." Her smile widened, revealing teeth that gleamed like polished pearls. "I am Vera, Night Whisper of the Australian people. And you, Marcus Kane, have saved the most precious thing in my universe." As she spoke, Marcus noticed small details that made her even more captivating. The way her head tilted slightly when she looked at him, the graceful gestures of her long-fingered hands, the way her crystalline fur seemed to respond to her emotions with subtle shifts in color and luminosity. "Pip was hurt," Marcus said simply. "Anyone would have helped." Vera stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could feel the gentle warmth that radiated from her skin. "No," she said softly, reaching out to touch his arm with fingers that were surprisingly warm. Many would have turned away from what they did not understand. Many would have seen only alien strangeness and felt only fear. But you saw a child in need, and you opened your heart. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Marcus's nervous system. Where her fingers touched his arm, he felt a tingling sensation that seemed to spread throughout his body. More than that, he sensed her emotions more clearly. Gratitude, so profound it was almost overwhelming. But underneath that, something else that made his mouth go dry. Interest. Attraction. A curiosity about him that went beyond mere gratitude. Among my people, Vara continued, her eyes never leaving his, there is a concept we call the heart that, when someone saves the life of our young, they become family to us in a way that transcends blood or species. You are bound to us now, Marcus Kane, whether you wish it or not. Marcus found himself leaning slightly into her touch, drawn by something he couldn't quite define. I didn't save him expecting anything in return, he said quietly. I just couldn't leave him hurt and alone. I know, Vera whispered, moving even closer. And that is precisely why the heart debt exists. It is not payment for services. Rendered, it is recognition of the kind of soul that acts from pure compassion. Before Marcus could respond, she did something that nearly made his knees buckle. Rising up on her toes, she pressed her forehead against his in a gesture that was clearly intimate in her culture. Her crystalline fur brushed against his skin with a sensation like warm silk, and he felt her breath on his face, sweet and somehow otherworldly. I have traveled far to find you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My people were skeptical. When I told them I was seeking out the human who saved my child, they warned me that your species could be violent, unpredictable. But I see in your eyes what Pip showed me in his memories: kindness, loneliness, and a strength that protects rather than destroys. Marcus stood frozen, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment and by sensations he'd never experienced before. The gentle pressure of her forehead against his, the warmth of her presence, the way her mental touch seemed to resonate with something deep in his consciousness. It was like nothing he'd ever felt with another human being. I don't understand, he said softly, though he wasn't entirely sure what specifically he was referring to, the cultural implications, the growing attraction he felt, or the way she seemed to see straight through all his carefully constructed barriers. Understanding comes with time, Vera replied, stepping back slightly, but keeping her hands on his arms. For now, know that you are precious to me, Marcus Kane. You have given me back my child, and in doing so, you have earned my devotion. The word devotion sent another shock through Marcus's system. The way she said it, with such quiet intensity, made it clear this wasn't simple gratitude. This was something far more profound and potentially life-changing. Where is Pip? Marcus asked, partly because he genuinely wanted to know, and partly because he needed to break the spell she was weaving around him before he did. Something foolish. Vera's expression softened with maternal affection. He is safe with his clutch siblings, telling them stories of the brave human who healed his wounds and fed him sweet fruits. He speaks of you often, and with great love. I'm glad he's safe, Marcus said, meaning it. He's a special kid. Yes, he is. And he has chosen you as his bound parent, which is a great honor among our people. Vera's eyes sparkled with what might have been amusement. He has declared to the entire settlement that Marcus Kane is now part of our family, and that anyone who disagrees will have to answer to him personally. Despite everything, Marcus found himself chuckling. That sounds like Pip, small but fierce. Very much like his mother in that regard, Vera said with a smile that held just a hint of challenge. We do not give our trust lightly, but when we do, it is absolute. The implications of her words hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt the weight of a decision he wasn't ready to make. This extraordinary woman was offering him something family, belonging, possibly more, that he'd convinced himself he no longer needed or wanted. But looking into her prismatic eyes, feeling the warmth of her presence and the gentle touch of her mind against his, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed solitude might not be the sanctuary he'd thought it was. It might actually be a prison, and this beautiful alien woman might be holding the key. "Would you like to come inside?" he asked, gesturing toward the station. "I can make something to eat, and you can tell me more about your people. About Pip." Vera's smile was radiant. "I would like that very much, Marcus Kane. We have much to discuss, you and I." As they walked toward the station together, Marcus felt as though he was crossing a threshold into something unknown and potentially wonderful. The careful isolation he'd maintained for 8 years was crumbling, and for the first time since he'd arrived on Zephyr 7, he found himself looking forward to whatever came next. The twin suns were beginning their descent toward the horizon, painting the crystalline desert in shades of gold and crimson. But Marcus barely noticed the spectacular sunset. His attention was entirely focused on the remarkable woman beside him and the growing certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 2 weeks after Vera's visit, Marcus found himself following her graceful form through a landscape that defied everything he thought he knew about. Zephyr 7. The crystalline formations here weren't random geological accidents. They were cultivated, shaped by Australian biotechnology into living architecture that pulsed with soft, internal light. "Your people did all this?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with wonder as they crested a ridge and the full scope of the Australian settlement spread before them. Vera turned to smile at him, her crystalline fur shimmering with pride. "We do not build in the way your people understand building. We grow, we nurture, we become partners with the living crystal of this world." The settlement was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Spires of living crystal twisted toward the sky in impossible spirals, connected by graceful bridges that seemed to float without support. Gardens of crystalline plants created prismatic forests that caught and refracted the light of the twin suns into rainbow cascades. And moving through it all were the Australians themselves, beings of such ethereal beauty that Marcus felt like a crude mechanical construct by comparison. "It's incredible," he breathed, genuinely awed. "Come," Vera said, taking his hand with casual intimacy that still sent electric shocks through his nervous system. "There are many who wish to meet the human who saved young Pip." As they descended into the settlement, Marcus became increasingly aware of the attention they were drawing. Some Australians watched with curious welcome, their prismatic eyes bright with interest. Others seemed more reserved, their mental emanations. Marcus was becoming increasingly sensitive to the psychic background noise of their species, tinged with wariness or outright suspicion. Their first stop was a massive crystalline dome that, Vera explained, served as both community center and governing hall. Inside, the space was filled with soft, harmonious light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Seated on what appeared to be grown crystal furniture was an elderly Australian, whose silver-white fur marked him as an elder of considerable age and wisdom. "Marcus Kane," Vera said formally. "I present Elder Thane Silverstream, wisdom keeper of our settlement." The elder rose with fluid grace, despite his apparent age, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of centuries. When he spoke, his mental voice touched Marcus's mind directly, bypassing the need for spoken language entirely. "Welcome, Marcus Kane. The one called Pip speaks of you with great affection and respect. He has declared you bond family, which creates interesting complications?" "Complications?" Marcus asked aloud, not yet comfortable with the purely mental communication. Elder Thane smiled, switching to spoken standard for Marcus's comfort. "Among Our people bond family relationships carry significant obligations and privileges. By accepting our gratitude, by caring for our young, you have become something more than ally, something closer than friend. You are family now, with all that entails. Marcus felt Vera's hand squeeze his gently, her emotional support flowing through their growing mental connection. I'm honored, he said sincerely, but I'm not sure I understand all the implications. Few outsiders ever have the opportunity to learn, came a new voice from behind them. Marcus turned to see another Australian approaching, this one female, with crystalline fur of deep purple black and an expression that was decidedly less welcoming than the elders. My daughter, Nova Starweaver, Vera said quietly, and Marcus caught the tension in her voice. She serves as our settlement's protector. Nova moved with predatory grace, circling Marcus like a hunter evaluating prey. Her mental emanations were sharp, suspicious, tinged with what felt like barely controlled hostility. A human, she said, making the word sound like an accusation. In our sacred spaces, among our children, claiming bond family status with our most precious treasures. Nova, Vera warned, her own mental presence flaring with protective anger. No, sister, Nova replied, her eyes never leaving Marcus. This needs to be said. Humans are known throughout the galaxy as warriors, conquerors, destroyers of worlds. They take what they want and justify it afterward. How do we know this one is different? Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the hall upon him. This was clearly a test, a moment that would determine whether he could truly find acceptance among these people. More importantly, it was a test of his relationship with Vera. Could she stand with him against her own family's disapproval? You're right to be suspicious, Marcus said quietly, addressing Nova directly. My species has done terrible things. I've done terrible things in service to causes I thought were just. But I'm not here as a conqueror or a warrior. I'm here because I couldn't leave a child in pain, and because your sister has shown me kindness. I didn't know I needed. Nova's expression didn't change, but Marcus sensed a slight shift in her mental emanation surprise, perhaps at his honesty. Pretty words, she said, but words are wind. What proof can you offer of your true intentions? Before Marcus could answer, a familiar trilling sound echoed through the hall. Pip came racing toward them with the boundless energy of youth, his crystalline fur blazing with joy and excitement. The young Australian launched himself at Marcus without hesitation, wrapping his arms around the human's waist in an enthusiastic hug. Marcus, Marcus, you came. I told everyone you would come. Pip's mental voice was like bright music in Marcus's mind, filled with uncomplicated love and trust. The hall fell silent as every Australian present witnessed the obvious bond between human and child. Pip pulled back to look up at Marcus with shining eyes, then turned to address the gathering with the fearless confidence only children possess. This is my bond parent Marcus, Pip announced proudly. He fixed my hurts and gave me sweet food and kept me safe when I was lost. Anyone who says bad things about him is wrong and stupid. A ripple of amused affection passed through the assembled Australians, and Marcus saw several previously suspicious expressions soften. Children's judgments, it seemed, carried significant weight in Australian culture. Nova, however, was not so easily swayed. Children can be deceived, she said, though with less venom than before. They see kindness and assume virtue. Then perhaps you should look deeper, suggested Elder Thane gently. Observe not just what he says, but what he does. Over the following hours, Marcus was given a tour of the settlement that felt part welcome and part examination. He met crystal shapers who grew tools and buildings from living rock, bioengineers who partnered with the planet's unique ecosystem to create sustainable technology, and artists who painted with light itself. At each stop, he asked questions. With genuine curiosity, listened with respectful attention. and offered insights from his own engineering background when appropriate. Gradually, he sensed the community's attitude shifting from suspicion to cautious acceptance. The turning point came when they visited the settlement's power generation facility, a complex array of crystalline structures that converted the planet's unique electromagnetic field into usable energy. The chief engineer, an Australian named Zen Lightbender, was struggling with efficiency problems that were reducing their power output. "May I?" Marcus asked, studying the configuration with professional interest. Zen gestured permission, and Marcus spent several minutes examining the setup with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life working with energy systems. Finally, he pointed to a specific crystal formation. "The resonance frequency is slightly off," he said. "Your crystals are fighting each other instead of harmonizing. If you adjust the growth angle of these three formations by about 15 degrees, you should see a significant improvement in power transfer efficiency." Zen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You can see the resonance patterns?" "I can hear them," Marcus replied. "Humans aren't psychic like your people, but we're good at recognizing mechanical patterns. To me, this sounds like an engine running rough." Intrigued, Zen made the suggested adjustments. The change was immediately apparent, the subtle discordant hum that Marcus had noticed smoothed out into a harmonious tone, and the power readings jumped by nearly 20%. "Remarkable," Zen breathed, studying the readings. "We've been trying to solve this problem for months." Word of Marcus's contribution spread quickly through the settlement, and by evening, the atmosphere around him had changed completely. He was no longer the suspicious outsider, but the helpful Bond family member who just solved a major technical problem. As the twin suns set and the settlement's crystalline structures began their nightly luminescence, Vera led Marcus to her personal dwelling, a graceful spire that grew from the mountainside like a frozen waterfall. Inside, the living crystal walls provided soft, intimate lighting that made Vera's fur shimmer like captured starlight. "You handled Nova well," she said as they settled onto cushions that seemed to mold themselves to their bodies. "She is protective of our family, sometimes overly so." "She was right to question me," Marcus replied. "I'm an outsider asking to be accepted into something precious and rare." "I'd be suspicious too." Vera moved closer, close enough that her warmth enveloped him like a living embrace. "And now? How do you feel about becoming part of something larger than yourself?" Marcus considered the question seriously. A month ago, he would have been terrified by the very concept. His isolation had been his armor against a universe that had taken everyone he'd ever cared about. But looking into Vera's prismatic eyes, feeling the gentle touch of her mind against his, he realized that armor had become a cage. "Terrified," he admitted, "and hopeful, and grateful that Pip got lost in that storm and found his way to me." Vera's smile was radiant as she leaned forward to press her forehead against his in the intimate greeting he was learning to cherish. "The stars brought you to us, Marcus Kane, and now that you are here, I find myself hoping you will choose to stay." The implications of her words hung in the crystalline air between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Marcus had come to Zephyr 7 seeking isolation and found instead connection, community, and something that felt remarkably like home. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." Outside, the settlement's living crystal sang its nightly song to the stars, and Marcus Kane began to understand that some bridges, once built, changed both sides forever.